Welcome, everyone, to this afternoon's presentation related to the evaluation of university programs, also known as the Return on Investment Study. There's been some conversation on campus about this, so the provost asked Karen Blackwell and I to lead a presentation of this, and we're joined by two other folks, Suzanne Dellinger and Sean Farrell, who are involved in looking at the deliverable, which was a set of dashboards that we're going to show to you or show you some pieces of this afternoon. So we're so happy to have you here. We are recording in order to make this presentation available to others on campus who are unable to attend. We do want to hear your questions. We're hoping to get through the material in about 40 to 45 minutes and then open it up for questions from you all. So if you could hold your questions, that would be great. But if you have a question that really needs the context of the conversation at the time, go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand and let us know that you're out there. We are absolutely, thank you, Lisa, for your question about the PowerPoint. We're going to distribute the recording and we're going to distribute the PowerPoint so that you can see the full content of the slides. And so your colleagues who aren't able to make it will be able to see that too. So let me go ahead and introduce myself first and ask the rest of the group to do so. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jody Petazzoni. I am an Associate Vice Provost here at UNC Greensboro, working in the areas of assessment, accreditation, and academic program planning. And I was the point person, the liaison to the advisory council that was put together for this group. Karen?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Blackwell, Director of Institutional Research and Enterprise Data Management. And my role on the ROI study is in the Data Owners Group.
Suzanne.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Dellinger. I am also in institutional research and enterprise data management. I'm a business analyst in that department, and my role was as a reviewer and data validation person within the project.
And Sean.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Farrell. I work in human resources as the HR information systems manager, and like Susan, was asked to participate in the data validation and review.
Super. So we're going to go ahead and do this presentation and let you know where things stand today with this project. Ooh. So an outline of where we're going to be headed. First, we want to talk to you about the history of the project and the partners that were engaged in this. The origin of this study is very important. We're going to talk to you about the roles that we took in this project and the timeline of how things developed. Karen's going to step you through meta departments. That's an important term that we want you to be familiar with because it's essential to understand the data that are going to be presented. Then Sean and Suzanne are going to talk you through an overview of the dashboards. There are three essential bodies of dashboards: institutional context, student ROI, and state ROI, that will give you a picture of what the end product is that we're going to see in this. Throughout the process, we're going to talk to you about challenges that we have encountered throughout the project. And again, we'll show you some of the data and talk to you about the next steps of what's going to be happening in this project as well. So this project came about at the request of the North Carolina General Assembly. And I think that that's really important to understand. The three organizations that have been engaged are Deloitte, RPK Group, and the Burning Class Institute. And they were partnered together to conduct this study for the North Carolina General Assembly. So they are the customer, they are the client for this process. And I think that that context is really important to understand as we start to look at the data, as we start to look at things, how things came together, and what is actually going to be the end result of this. It's going to matter. So Deloitte had the main role in bringing expertise into the area of academic costing, student outcomes, and workforce analytics. RPK brought to the group their expertise in evaluating return on investment studies, and Burning Glass brought some proprietary workforce data and analytical methodological expertise. The main objective for this engagement was to assess the return on investment for students and state, and also to put it in the context of each institution of the North Carolina of UNC system. There were two deliverables for this engagement. One is a report, and that report will be delivered to the legislature. The other is a set of dashboards, and that set of dashboards is going to go to the General Assembly, but it will also be made available to the UNC System Office. Deloitte and their partners were contracted to produce a report for others, those others being the General Assembly, in order to analyze and evaluate our UNC system programs. But they made it very clear, they will not be doing an analysis of these data. They are going to leave the analysis up to the UNC system, the institution, and others. So their deliverable does not include an analysis of programs or institutions. It's also important, however, to note that programs, this entire project was called an evaluation of university programs, but that word programs is not defined in the same way that we do on campus. I mentioned the term meta department. Karen is going to talk us through that, but it's important to note too, programs as a unit of analysis is different in this program than in our data and how we look at it. So 5 really important things we want you to keep in mind as you look at these data. 1, I've mentioned that the deliverables are report to the legislature and the dashboards. So they are the customers. The North Carolina General Assembly is the customers for this. The report that the partners will provide will be baseline data, and it will not make any recommendations. They will not do analysis. They will not tell the General Assembly how to use these data. So they made that very clear in the process. Dashboards will not provide functionality to compare institutions. And that's one thing that a lot of people asked. Will we be able to set up UNC Greensboro and then compare us to the UNC system or to our sister institutions? The tool, the dashboards do not provide a tool that will allow us to do that. You absolutely can do it, because you can look at every piece of data for the system at large and for each sister institution individually, but you will have to do the manual work to actually put together those comparisons. And again, something that I've mentioned and something that is important, the unit of analysis is different from how we as an institution look at data. We look at academic programs, sometimes defined as a major, sometimes defined as a concentration, sometimes defined as a certificate. It's a different unit of measure for this program to a large extent. And again, as I've mentioned, and it bears repeating, contextualizing the data is up to the institutions and up to the systems. Deloitte was not charged with and will not be delivering an analysis of the data. Okay, so a brief conversation about the roles of the folks here in this group and others who have been involved in this project. My job in this project was to act as the university's liaison to the advisory council. The advisory council was one member from each of the institutions who would serve as the university's main point of contact for project-related inquiries. We were allowed to review and provide feedback on work products at key points of analysis as things were being developed. We were able to provide input about institutional characteristics or nuances to account that might need to be accounted for in analysis. And we were allowed to clarify questions or direct our team to appropriate campus members who could answer questions. Karen, do you want to talk about your role on the data owners group?
Yes, so the data owners group only met twice in the entire process, once alone and once in concert with the advisory council. And we talked about data elements, some of the student data mart data, and how, along with the pilot institutions, help them better guide development of the dashboards.
Yeah. UNC Greensboro acted as a pilot institution. So some of our leadership and our finance administration department, and then the deans and department heads had different roles along the way because UNC Greensboro was identified as a pilot institution, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But we had a little bit of input in terms of asking questions and providing some guidance to the consultants as they were developing their program. But the pilot group, I as an advisory group member only had 4 meetings in June, September, November, and December. And the pilot group had one meeting in June, 3 meetings in July, and 1 meeting in September. So there was a lot of work going on between and among the consulting groups while we were awaiting the reception of information and decisions that they were making. So I think that that's important to know too. Sean, would you talk about your role?
Sure. I was invited along with Suzanne Dellinger and Jennifer Leong to review the product as it stood beginning in December. And we had an opportunity to kind of take a look at the data to try to validate what we could, even though we didn't really have direct access to a data lineage to understand exactly all of the minutia of how the data was actually prepared. And we had an opportunity to take a look at the charts, try to understand if they made sense within the context, and provide feedback to the team. And we did end up meeting twice, once in December and once in January. And what we see today is kind of, at least in part, a product of some of those meetings.
Suzanne, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, so there were 3 pilot institutions. UNC Greensboro was joined by NC A&T and NC State as the institutions that would work with the consulting groups preliminarily to have conversations about and to look at data. So we reviewed some concept and department associations for the meta department component. And we reviewed some HR and finance concepts and data and provided a significant amount of guidance to the consultants about what they would find in our finance data and how best to go about the information that they were looking for. The pilot institutions had an opportunity, as I mentioned, to provide some feedback and to discuss a few of these questions that were brought to us by the consultants. So this was the substance of the meeting that we had with them in June. This doesn't include all of the questions, but it's the essence of it. They allowed us to have conversations about what metrics or data we would be interested in seeing in the dashboards. We talked about what new programs we might have introduced, what programs we might have deleted, and what programs might be in the pipeline coming for us so that they could get a sense of what our entire inventory was. Same with NC State and A&T. And then they asked us if we would talk about what student outcomes we would typically track and measure across different academic programs. And then they wanted a little bit more information about our student characteristics, our student demographics, how they might differ, and what might be important to understand about the data that they might be seeing for student ROI, institutional, state ROI, and institutional context. And some of the things that we thought were very important for them to understand is that UNC Greensboro has a special population. We're incredibly concerned for our students. We have significant underrepresented populations, such as rural and Pell eligible students, who really impact the profile of our students and how our students behave. We know, for example, that our students return to the towns where they came from, where they don't have the same opportunities for high salaries, and therefore the state return on investment for our students who like to serve the state and serve their origins, the counties from which they come, would impact the state return on investment, for example. And we thought that these things were really important to understand our students. The other component to that is that this is a point in time, just a snapshot in time. When Sean and Suzanne show you the information, they're just a couple of years of data. And without looking at a wider range of data that includes pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic data, you couldn't really get a sense of how our students behave at the same time that how our students behave is changing. And we felt that it was important to communicate that to the consultants. Thirdly, the cost to educate our students is higher. Given the populations that we have, there are student services that we provide and a level of service that we provide that might not be experienced at other institutions. And we wanted to make sure to communicate that. I want to communicate here that the boundaries of this study, after having conversations with the consultants and working on the pilot study, they came back to us and they said, this is what we're going to be able to do. we had said to them that our students' perceptions of what they get out of their learning at UNC Greensboro was important. But what we learned is that student perceptions, institutional connectedness, civic outcomes would not be part of the deliverables for this product because they indicated that they could not find comparable data across all of the institutions. And without data to be collected from each institution that they could then use in the same way as they were integrating it into the ROIs and the institutional context, it wasn't usable. So those components, which we feel are pretty important, will not be part of this study. What will be included are measures like contextual data about each program, students, faculty, staff who are involved, basic cost analysis of instruction at the meta department level, cost to students, state funding, and institutional outcomes such as credit production, degrees produced, and that sort of thing. So this is what is going to be included in our data, but also what will be missing will not be included. Finally, data were gathered from 4 essential domains. For student enrollment, data came mostly from the Student Data Mart. Many of you are probably familiar with the Data Mart concept. It used to be that when data was shared from institutions to the UNC System Office, we would deliver files to them electronically. There is now an almost live exchange through these data marts. The 3 data marts are the Student Data Mart, the Human Resources Data Mart, and the Finance Data Mart. And those 3 data marts form the central data sources for these 3 dashboards. Integrated into those 3 data mart sources is the burning glass component, which is real-time job posting data and social profile data for each institution, as along with the Department of Commerce, the North Carolina Department of Commerce information that comes from the NC Tower database. So for the most part, the data that they are using for these dashboards is the same data that we report out to the UNC System Office. So that's just the overarching context for the program, what its history is, what its origins are, and where the data come from. Karen is now going to talk you through the idea of the meta department.
Thank you, Jody. The next few slides, we will touch on the concept of a meta department and the process that was used for creating the categories. The full list of meta departments, along with their descriptions and SIP code affiliations, will be shown, as well as mapping of UNCG data into these meta department categories. We'll look at some of the challenges faced in mapping our data and our concerns with using meta departments for comparison purposes. Next slide. Deloitte and RPK worked together to create a system that would classify programs among institutions. Both the course and the HR department data were grouped and mapped into this system. The metadata is used as the unit of measure across all institutional analyses. But when we look at the student ROI and the state ROI dashboards, there are components that use the field of study as a unit of analysis. They did not look at degree programs exclusively. What they did was create a bigger entity to house multiple programs and multiple departments in order to compare. So degree programs were mapped from the academic side, and the non-academic departments, as indicated in purple, came from the financial and HR department side. Slide. Deloitte and RPK used this flow chart process depicted here to categorize the departments into either an institution, college, or a named meta department category. Courses or departments out of scope for the project were moved to exclude bucket. At UNCG, we only had 1 program excluded. That was the Comp Trans Post-Secondary Education Program. So if a department was not related to an academic program or instruction, then it was mapped to the first one you see here, the institution meta department bucket. If it was related to academic program or instruction, and it was in scope, and it aligned with more than 1 department, then it fell into the college bucket. Otherwise, it was assigned to a single named meta department category. The 2-digit SIP code families were an important and crucial part of this assignment process. This slide shows the final mapping of the meta departments by SIP family area. It's important to note that several of the SIP codes you see here have an asterisk next to them. And it describes it fully in the footnote here, but SIP families were a guide in meta department development, and they're not perfectly descriptive of the meta departments. SIP families or the 6-digit SIP code were not used exclusively for mapping because it was not uniformity across institutions in the utilization of the codes. By creating meta departments and defining them, the hope was that institutions would reach relative consensus in regards to which broad categories their programs and departments fall. As shown previously in the meta department concept slide, both the course and HR departments were mapped to meta departments. This slide here only depicts the mapping of the course academic departments to the meta department. In the development process, UNCG was given an initial mapping of its departments into one of these meta departments and was asked for feedback. We shared the spreadsheet with the provost office and deans and asked them to help us review and revise any of the assignments that were made. Most of the mappings seemed logical. The one suggestion we made was to move social work from the social sciences meta department to the health professions meta department. We provided the feedback to Deloitte and were told that our suggestions would be considered along with all the other feedback they received. They did accept the social work reclassification. And then worth noting, later on in the process, after initial review of the dashboards, we asked that nanoscience be moved to physical science from engineering, and that too was accepted. The most significant challenge with the meta department structure is that at UNCG, we're accustomed to evaluating our data based on programs. Because of this, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to contrast and compare the ROI dashboard data to the program and single department data that we use internally for decision making. One other potential concern, using social work again as an example, is that we don't know if other institutions that have a social work program have mapped it to health professions as we do, or whether it remained in social sciences, or if it remained in the history, political science, public policy category, where the SIP family 44 code appeared on the previous slide. We have asked for a complete mapping, but have not yet been given one. It's our expectation that at some point they will share the full meta department mapping for all the institutions. Again, as mentioned earlier, SIP families were just a guide in meta department development, but are not perfectly descriptive or aligned. One other cautionary point to make when looking at the student ROI dashboard relative to our internal reporting is that the student ROI dashboard limits the analysis to first majors only. We provide data for all majors when we report and create dashboards. We will look at that data later in the dashboard section of the presentation. Now we'll step into an overview of the dashboards. There's a landing page dashboard that's not shown here that provides a summary and a glossary as a reference, but the three main dashboard deliverables are the institutional context dashboard, the student ROI dashboard, and the state ROI dashboard. The institutional context one aims to respond to the legislative request to provide the number of faculty and staff employed for each program and the related costs to operate each program, inclusive of total staff, compensation and benefits, things like facility costs and any other related expenses, overhead included. It provides general context about the UNC system and the 16 constituent institutions. The second one, the student ROI dashboard, provides a detailed correlation between degree of study and career roles, including information on expected lifetime career earnings, income bands, economic mobility, graduate degree attainment, and career fields based on the program of study as defined by the SIP code. And the state ROI dashboard provides a high-level overview of ROI for the state by looking at the incremental gain in lifetime earnings for the student for each incremental dollar invested by the state. This additional spending power might equate to additional tax, welfare, other gains for the state. The state ROI dashboard also provides key contextual information on industry trends, state migration, and high demand occupation. The two main focus areas in the institutional context dashboard are operating costs and academic production. Metrics such as faculty FTE, salary expense, staff FTE per program, think meta department here when you see program, and cost per credit hour fall in the operating cost section. The academic production section displays data related to the number of annual degrees, credit hours produced, completion rates, time to degree, class size, and the number of SEHs per faculty FTE. For this dashboard, data are sourced from student finance and human resources data marts. The student ROI dashboard has sections on enrollment, return, and ROI, and a summary section as well. The summary metrics include the number of students in a program, the completion rates, time to degree, and the number of degrees produced. Investment-related metrics are the cost of attendance and the student assumed out-of-pocket expenses. Metrics on return are the incremental student post-graduation lifetime earnings and the program of study to employment alignment. Lifetime ROI, the average number of years for earnings to exceed investment, and the student debt are all part of the ROI section. On this dashboard, data are sourced from the Student Data Mart, Commerce Data, and the BGI social profile data from Burning Glass. And finally, the state ROI dashboard has sections on government investment, return, and ROI, again with summary tab. Summary metrics include current workforce needs, projected workforce needs, and the share of graduates in high demand occupations. Government investment looks at state appropriations and student federal grant aid. The return is measured by economic mobility. ROI looks at the retention of students in North Carolina, the migration of students into the state, and a comparison of per student state appropriations against income tax based on incremental lifetime earnings. And data for this dashboard, again, is the Student Data Mart, Commerce Data, and the BGI job posting data, and some supply and demand dashboards from the Department of Commerce. There's a lot of information in these dashboards. As we have reviewed them internally, we find them not intuitive in nature. Depending on the audience, interpretation will be difficult without an in-depth documentation and training on the data elements presented. So many questions remain. We will not be providing a live demonstration of the dashboards today because they're still in a draft state, but instead, we prepared some slides to give you a feel for some of the metrics presented in both the institutional context dashboard and the student ROI one. That said, I'd like to turn it over to Sean and Suzanne for a demo.
Thanks, Karen. Before we review some of the institutional context charts, I did want to provide some context for the data. Charts in this ROI come from various sources as discussed, including the UNCG data marts. For those of you who are not familiar with the data marts, they're recurring snapshots of employment, finance, and student data that are sent from each UNC system institution to a central UNC system office database where that data is then normalized according to their specification. This data is then used for a variety of purposes system-wide, so including the annual PDF report, various federal and state EEO reports, salary and equity analyses, public information requests, and more. For the UNC ROI project, data from HR Data Mart includes various employee attributes such as faculty and staff classifications, FTE, and tenure status. The finance data mart data includes labor and non-labor costs for each program or meta department in this case. And the student data mart data includes all other UNCG academic data related to students, degrees, and programs. Charts from the institutional context dashboard contain information related to the number of employees and related costs to operate each program or meta department, providing background and general context about the institution. Next slide, please. It's also important to understand that data submitted to the various data marts must be viewed within the context of what the data is being used for under any given circumstance. So for example, here we have two sets of data. The first one at the top is from the ROI study, and the second one is from the faculty dashboard located on the institutional research website. Both of these tell us the the FTE for the October calendar year 2020, which is the 20/21 academic year. And we can see that the FTE is in the ballpark, but it's not identical. And this is due to the varying natures of the types of reports for which the data is then being transformed. And here we can see a similar comparison with tenure status. Again, similar numbers, but different due to the reporting requirements for these two different reports. The reason I'm sharing this is so that we're all aware that we may see different numbers from various UNCG reports that we have access to as we try to compare that data to the ROI dashboards, just based on the different context of the reports themselves. Next slide, please. So as we begin reviewing these charts, know that the data are presented in a variety of ways, including tables, bar graphs, scatter plots, etc. So we'll be reviewing just a sample of these today. This first chart is a table that provides a breakdown of the direct costs and academic overhead costs and indirect costs by the meta department. So briefly, the explanation of these costs are first, the direct costs. These are dollars labeled as instruction or academic support. These are derived from the finance information based on the labor distribution for employees at the university. These are faculty salaries. There's second, the academic overhead costs, which are really three parts, broken down into three sub areas. These are expenses outside of instruction, equipment, and similar resources. Unallocated college level expenses. These are expenses not directly tied to a meta department. For example, dean's salaries for a given college. And then third, all expenses with instruction or academic support program code, but are found within non-academic units. Those are the academic overhead costs. And then third, we have the indirect costs. These are university-wide expenses not tied to meta departments and not coded to instruction or academic support. These can also be considered or labeled as institutional overhead. So in this table, what we see is the actual list of the meta departments, the three different categories of costs, and then the grand total. Remember that these meta departments are groupings of programs and departments and cannot necessarily be tied back to one specific department or another. Next slide, please. Now, this chart can also be selected to show the same costs, but broken out by student credit hour. And with this view, you can see that the grand total rankings are different because this is due to the differing number of student credit hours produced in a given meta department. In the preceding slide, you may have noticed that the business administration and health professionals ranked with the highest cost. However, on this slide, nursing and education ranked with the highest cost per student credit hour. Next slide, please. And then finally, if we take that tabular cost data from those charts and place it in a scatter plot, we can start to visualize how these costs for each meta department, relate to each other within the institution. Here you can see at a glance the outliers with higher or lower total costs aligned with the total number of student credit hours in this case. Using this information, you can refer back to the more detailed tabular data to infer as to whether this may be due to labor cost or equipment or other overhead costs. This also illustrates that though some of the charts do allow for direct comparison of data in different formats, not all are direct. So care should be taken when comparing these different charts. And again, this is just a small sampling of a couple of charts that are found in this institutional context dashboard, of which there are a great number. And next, Suzanne will share data related to the student ROI dashboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. So again, the student ROI dashboards, Karen said, really allows us to look into that relationship between the field of study and career metrics for our students, earnings, income band movement, economic mobility, how many go on to get another graduate degree. And we really are focusing on a lot of data that's coming from external to the UNC system office, data mart, student data mart, etc. We do use the North Carolina Tower data from the Department of Commerce and the BGI social and job posting information, as well as bringing in information on our what they call our completers for graduate and undergraduate. These focus on field of study. Again, this is not meta department level or even our program level data. We are looking at field of study level 1, which is the highest level of granularity, is the 2-digit zip code, and then drilling down into level 2 or the 6-digit zips. Just do caution that the dashboards are not necessarily comparable on that program and data meta department level. Next slide. So this is the first chart that I wanted to bring to your attention, and this is the number and composition of our students in and across these field of study. The gray arrow indicates the field of study filter that we have that will allow us to do that granular drill down. This is reporting head count. It is not reporting FTE. Additionally, this data is not sourced from a distinct count of students. It is a cumulative count of students over an academic year. So therefore, if a student attends, is in a program in the fall and in the spring, they could show up in this data twice. So that is also something else to keep in mind when comparing this back to other reporting sources. Next slide. I'm using the Department of Education as an example of this drill down capability. I really like this functionality because it does give us that opportunity to look at those subcategories of programs across all of our fields of study. And give us the opportunity to really get into some granular data. The good thing about these filters that I'm showing you here, they do apply. You apply it once and it will apply to everything on this particular portion of the dashboard. So on this particular page, there are 4 to 6 different visualizations that you will be able to see, and these filters will generally apply to all of those visualizations at one time. So that does make this functionality a little bit easier to use as you go forward. The next slide is more in depth into some of the financial pieces that we're really trying to get into here with these dashboards. Again, we have the same filter functionality that you'll see at the top of the page that will allow you to look at the field of study. And once again, these will drill down into that level 2 granularity, so that you can truly see what's going on with each one of those 6-digit zip areas of responsibility. I want to focus first on the boxes that run across the page in the equation portion of the page, as I like to call it. We have a median sticker price to completion. And what that is it is the average cost of attendance for the academic years of 18 to 20. That has been normalized into an average cost of attendance at the campus, degree, and field of study level. So this is specific to UNCG, and it will adapt to those filters as you change and go into specific fields of study. You will see these numbers adjust accordingly based off of that information. We are calculating this using what they term an imputed time to degree, which is basically the number of falls and springs that an individual takes to get to actually that degree completion, divided by 2 to come up with that actual time to degree. It's sort of a simplified formula. But that is what we're coming up to for that median cost. So the cost per attendance would be multiplied by the time to degree to come up with that sticker price. The median awards for grants and waivers is exactly that. It does look at the median financial aid, which includes grants, waivers, and other funds received by a student. It does not include loans or work study programs. However, to complicate it a little bit, it does include athletic scholarships that are awarded to a student through the financial aid process. So that would be considered in that number as well. And then finally, the calculated student investment is just the subtraction of those 2 numbers. And that is based off of what is remaining. We don't look into how they're going to actually fund that, just that is what our students have left that has to come from somewhere to pay for their degree. Oh, thank you. So the you got it before I said it, Jody. Thank you for that. So the next slide I wanted to bring to attention is one of the mobility or economic metrics that they're providing us. And this chart looks at a few different things. So again, we've still got those filters at the top that are going to work the same way as they have in the past. Anytime we're looking at any of the financial numbers, it is recommended, whether it's the previous chart that we just looked at or this one, that you do consider the student residency in setting that filter, because there is such a difference between in-state and out-of-state expense. So that is something that you do want to also consider when you're looking at these charts and setting your filters accordingly. What we've done here is just show you the highest level, which is that either all or the drill down. What we're looking at here in the boxes in the equation are the lifetime benefits of a degree. The first is the lifetime earnings on a degree. And that is just simply the correlation, trying to provide that correlation between what the benefit of a degree is, what your expected income could be with that degree. It does include our adult learners who may already have some income, base income started that would be a little bit higher than a first time in college student. These data are captured as they are reported, and those data really do come from that commerce information. The second is the lifetime earnings without a college degree. And without a college degree here is defined as not having a four-year degree. This information is sourced from 2 possible locations, and you can select that based off of what you're trying to accomplish here. You can use the American Community Study or ACS approach, which uses a broader set of data relative to folks who do not have a college degree, or you can focus on what is called the non-completers file, which is basically individuals who started in the UNC system and at our UNCG specifically, that did not complete their program, their 4 years, and they dropped out before 2 years into the program. So you have 2 choices as to how to look at that. Broadly speaking, the ACS is going to give you a broader group of individuals with which to do that comparison with. And then again, after the equal sign is just the net of those 2 numbers, which is the true, what they're measuring as the benefit that an individual receives for that college degree over a non-college degree. The bottom 2 charts are the pie chart and the columnar chart there use the county distress measures from the Commerce Division. It's called the distressed county measures. And what these are looking at are giving a measure of economic distress for each of the 100 counties in North Carolina. And then looking at how our graduates fall out relative to where they're living now and how different professions look in those counties. Tier 1 is the most distressed county, whereas the top tier 4 there, that is not, they are the better performing counties relative to these metrics. The state establishes these using 4 tiers, using 4 different metrics of economic stress, unemployment rate, median household income, the percentage growth in population for that county, and then the property tax base for that on a per capita basis for that county. So what we can look at here is at the 1 and 5 year timeframes. Where are our alums living? Where are what are the distribution of residency for an individual program or field of study? So we can look at, within education, so much of our population lives in a tier 1 distressed county versus serving in a tier 2 or 3 or 4. So that'll give us that idea of where our students are falling out and where they are using their degree when they leave us.
So to make everyone aware of what happens now with this project, as Sean mentioned, we were just handed the dashboards in December. So we've had a very small window of time to actually review what is here. What happens next is that Deloitte is going to turn these dashboards over to the UNC system office. And what they are going to do is, they've told us, will make this more broadly accessible to others. They haven't defined when that would happen and exactly who would be involved in the next layer of review, but they have said that it will be more publicly available and accessible. And they've indicated that the time frame for that review will be February and January. So we expect at some point to find out how to access these dashboards and who exactly should be able to get into them and take a look around. After that approximate 2-month window of review, the UNC system office is going to provide the feedback and return the dashboard maintenance over to Deloitte. They then have their finalization of their report and the dashboards to do before they turn those both into the North Carolina General Assembly in September. So that's their final deadline. As soon as we know how these will be made available and to whom they'll be made available, we'll communicate that out to campus with as much information as we can possibly provide. We're going to open this up to questions, but I wanted to let you know, in case anyone needs to leave or in case we don't get your question answered or something comes up afterward and you want to get a question to the team, or you want us to get a question to the UNC system office or our consulting team, please get in touch with me and I will work with this group and others to get your questions answered. But we are now going to thank you for your attention, for being here this afternoon, and open the conversation up to questions. And if you want to just raise your hands or unmute your mic, then we will get them addressed in the order in which people present themselves. Dr. Swanson. Afternoon.
Afternoon to you. I really appreciated this overview and the details in which you provided it. What strikes me is the scope of data that are available, just the enormous amount of data, and the fact that I believe it was Karen who shared that even with all this data, there's going to require some training to interpret what's being shared. And that in part depends on the question being asked and how they slice the data, et cetera. What I'm curious about then is, what's the process, as far as anyone knows right now, for helping those who will be using this for information and for decisions? What's the process for helping others interpret it?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that we sort of touched on a little bit, but should probably emphasize more, is that one of the deliverables that all of the institutions indicated would be needed is a set of user guides. So in order to get in here and understand the selection process and what the data elements are, we need a data dictionary, we need a user guide. They got a little bit better with that over time, but it's definitely not at the level that an amateur user could go in there, get into the dashboards and understand very clearly what is being presented. However, in terms of the context, we're unclear right now on how institutions will be allowed to engage in those conversations. It's important, again, to note that the North Carolina General Assembly is the customer for these dashboards and for the report. So Deloitte and the consulting groups are working with the General Assembly to understand what their use is going to be. But I see that the provost has her hand up, so I'm going to let her jump in.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I first wanted to thank Jody, Karen, Sean, and Suzanne for all your work behind the scenes, working with Deloitte, advocating for a better data set. I just wanted to say that this has been a topic of conversation among all provosts, and there's been some real frustration that there's exactly that, not going to be good context to understand the data. General Assembly folks are going to be trying to make sense of this, and they don't really have not just context, but an understanding of some of the issues with what the data is, what the data is. So we're quite concerned with that. And so one of the things that we've been doing is working collectively to try to provide a context statement for this first level of review. And so I wanted to thank Jody and Karen for initially drafting that, Andrew Hamilton, Alan Boyette, myself, and others have also provided some review. I've got it at the Chancellor's office now to provide a review about some of our concerns that Jody, Karen, and others have raised today. But I think you raise a really important comment, Dr. Swanson. How do we help the people who are really the audience here at the General Assembly understand and make sense of the data? So I will say that there's quite a bit of concern that there won't be appropriate training, even with a clear data dictionary. You got people looking at this data and making some assumptions. So we're working really hard to try to advocate that we provide more context. I don't know how successful we will be, but without it, I worry about the interpretations.
Susan. Thank you, Debbie. I'm not sure if she's
I'm here. I'm
okay.
here. Yeah. Okay. I know the horse has already left the barn, but I'm as a field anthropologist who has collected an awful lot of data and stories and narratives, as well as numerical data that we can count. I'm curious who collected this kind of data, and my question really is, using students and their accomplishments post-graduation during that window of 2018 through 2020, which are challenging economic times, did someone reach out and say, are you on your first job? Do you have a job? Are you working 3 jobs? This is, I still hear from graduates at the time, and their life journey is quite different from many of us who are tenure tracked. But who collected that kind of data to then say return on investment, therefore they have done such and such a thing?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. We brought that to their attention. That was one of the most important conversations that we had with them in June, when we met with them very early on in this program. They listened to us, but what they came back to us and said was, there is no system-wide comparable set of data that we can use to integrate that information into these dashboards. So they very clearly said that will not be part of it. We will leave that to you to contextualize it in whatever way we're going to be allowed to contextualize it. But we pointed it out, we made them aware of it, and they acknowledged it and also acknowledged they would not be using it. Paul.
Actually, before me, Lisa Levenstein, comment in chat or question.
Okay, sorry. Do you have any sense of the meaning of the data that has been collected from the tenor of the presentation? It seems like the data is or could be worrisome for UNCG, in part because of our students return to communities with poor job prospects. What other reasons? What is the data suggesting that is worrisome? So the challenge right now with the data is that we don't have it in a final version. Part of the work that we started doing in December was not just a functional review of how these dashboards would look and how they would present, but also a data review. And again, remember that the unit of analysis that they're using, the meta department, for a lot of this data is different from how we look at it. So we're still getting the data source dictionary back from them to allow us to do to retrofit or confirm the data that have been presented. So we're still in the process of that. Once that is done, and only once that is done, will we be able to really interpret what the data mean for us. But again, the other questions that have been asked here about our students specifically and the context that we understand needs to be applied to our student has to be taken into account. So we've got to understand the fuller picture of this project before we can answer those questions. But we know we have to do those things. Those things are important, and we share the concern that the data would be put out there with any contextualizing information. And it's the same concern that's shared by other UNC system schools. Paul, go ahead.
So I have a kind of a quick question, and it could be just that I'm not understanding how things are working, but how much would we or the system rely on consultants for data interpretation and that kind of thing? Is it just that we're going to learn how to use the data, contextualize it, or and then we'll make our own recommendations for how we're going to move forward? Or is this something that the consultants will look at, make their recommendations to us, and then we can kind of go through the data ourselves and figure out which way we want to go? Does that make sense? I don't know if
it makes sense, and this might be important to know. We're not sure what the purpose of these dashboards will be for the UNC system going forward. So this is a deliverable to the General Assembly. The UNC system has said we're going to take a look at it, take a look at the data, take a look at the functionality, and see if we can use it. What purposes we could use it for. There was some discussion about using it for evaluating what we used to call the low productivity reports for programs that did not graduate a minimum number of students in a certain time frame. But that is still completely up in the air. There have not been any decisions made about whether or how these dashboards will be used going forward. So I think that just as we have been taking time to evaluate these dashboards, we believe that the UNC System Office has been taking time to evaluate these dashboards to see exactly what their utilization would be.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. What other questions? See, it's 4:59, so maybe people are like right on the brink of getting ready to end their day.
Jody,
Susan,
if I may.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Andrew.
Just to add a layer to your response to Paul. Hey, Paul. A concern, not just speaking for myself, a concern that I have is that we're not the customer, and systems not the customer. So it's just not clear how much we're going to be asked to interpret or conceptualize or contextualize any of the information that's in the documents. And for me, that's the biggest worry, because on some ways of analyzing what we do, we're maybe the best in the system. I mean, dollar for dollar, we're producing more graduates than the so-called better schools because they spend so much more per student per year on instruction. But I don't know if we're going to be able to tell that story against the data, because we may not be asked.
And it's going to be up to everyone who goes in and uses these tools to decide how to use those data, right? We can instruct and interpret as we want, but if it's going to be a public tool that's out there, we've got to do what we can to structure our story on this end. Susan, did you have another question?
I did, and I think I remain more confused than from the beginning. And that was, what was the intent of this research going forward? If the client doesn't have a research question and they collected all this data with not a clear agenda in mind,
So
how to mine it.
Yeah, so I don't have the request for proposal that was distributed to which Deloitte responded. But what we do know is that the General Assembly is interested in knowing what the return on investment in higher education and the UNC system schools specifically are for the state and for students in particular. And then the third dashboard is the institutional context that provides some more information about that. So we know that that's what the intent was. It's looking at return on investment for the student and for the state in the UNC system higher education. And it's up to us now to help them understand that there may be more to the story than the dashboard data will reveal.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. It is 5:01. I am happy to entertain other questions, but I want to reiterate, if you have questions that come up after this, or if you need to leave now, and you want to ask a question, please email me. I have shared my email for those of you who haven't used it before. It's JEPETTAZ at uncg.edu. Please email me your questions. Please call me if you want to have a conversation. I will get those questions to the right people, whether it be this internal group, whether it be the UNC system office, or the consultants. We had a question that came up this morning about HERE funds. I have conveyed that question to the UNC system. They've shared it with Deloitte, and I'm waiting for them to, they've told me they're getting me the answer. I'm waiting for them to get that. It's going to be a couple days, but we will absolutely be responsive about this. Okay. I see Paul asked about the recording and about the slide presentation. Those will be distributed tomorrow at the earliest possible moment that I can get them out to everyone. And you should look for them through the same mode that you originally got the message for this meeting. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate your time and attention, and have a good evening. Go ahead, Eric.
Hey, thank you, Jody, and thanks for
Sure.
all the information. Just for my own clarification, how long will we have the dashboard as far as UNCG? Like, will we be able to keep this dashboard on an annual basis to evaluate, or is this just a one-time situation? Thank you.
So they have not made a decision about that. We were told that depending on what they look like and their utility in the end, this may be something that's maintained. And that's why it's going to eventually be turned over to the UNC system office, so that all of the management and maintenance of it could reside with the UNC system office, but they have not communicated those final steps for us.
Okay, thank you.
And again, we will do our best to communicate all of the information that we get as those decisions are being made back to campus. Vidya.
Yeah, the usual suspects are jumping in. I see. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is, this looks like only undergraduate education, graduate, it includes everything, graduate, master's, PhD?
It does. It includes all levels. Yeah, so you
Okay.
see undergraduate and graduate. The examples we happened to choose today to show you student return on investment were undergraduate. But yes, it includes every program. It includes every department, with very small exceptions. There were instances where statistically it made sense to leave some programs out of the data analysis. And that was a request by the universities who said, you can't statistically use this number of students in order to evaluate. So we can see if any, we don't know of any UNC Greensboro programs that were left out, but I will find out.
And the other question I had was with regard to these meta departments. It's not anything new. I have seen this in other schools. Is there a thinking that we may go down that path and for implementation? Right now, it looks like an exercise to see how the numbers fall out. But if there is any kind of, is it a 2-year plan, 3-year plan to get this going?
I'm not sure exactly what question you are asking me. If you're asking me whether this is how we're going to look at data going forward, I can tell you that this was a structure that Deloitte put in place. This is something that they've used with other systems and other institutions. And the intention of it was comparability. Because every institution in the UNC system structures their departments differently, putting different disciplines in different departments and combining departments in different ways. They wanted to essentially create kind of a lowest common denominator of evaluation across the institutions. So we don't know if the meta department is something that is going to be instituted and any farther than just these dashboards.
Because some schools have even had schools of information science and things like that. So that's why I asked, is it just data oriented, or is it also organizational structural changes will be looked into?
At this moment in time, Vidya, for this purpose, the meta departments were constructed for these dashboards and for comparability of data.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff.
Hi, thank you. That was a very helpful presentation. I have a two-part question. So the first part is, can we just get a sense of, based on what we know so far, how UNCG as a whole is going to look when compared with the other system schools? How are we going to look pretty bad in the ROI study? And how bad? That's, and that's a guess. We don't know in the end, but that's the first part of the question. And then the second part, I don't know who might know the answer to this question, but I'm struggling to imagine how the system office might act as a result of whatever they see at the end of this ROI study, right? So suppose, for example, UNCG comes out looking quite bad on the metrics that they decide to care about. Well, what can we try to do? I mean, on the one hand, we just switched over to a new funding model, and my sense is that the system office and the board of governors are in a way constrained by that new funding model. Like the funding the funding model just says what the funding is going to be. Is that right? And so if that's true, then what decisions might they make based on what they see from the ROI study?
So Jeff, there's certainly no way for me to anticipate how the UNC system is going to respond to these data. And in terms of how, let me start with your first question, which was about how UNCG looks. We are not even at the point of being able to have validated all of the data. So the dashboards have been rolled out to us to quasi-vet what those data are and what the functionality are. And we haven't really had complete time to drill down into all of that information. So we don't even know if everything's right. As Karen mentioned, they moved nanoscience into physical sciences, sort of as a last or most recent step. So having time to drill down into all of these sources and know what we really have in front of us, we still haven't had a complete opportunity to do that. The tool hasn't been made comparison friendly. That is, if you want to compare UNC Greensboro to the system office or to Charlotte or Chapel Hill or anybody else, you have to pull up each institution's data and step through each of them, all 65 plus charts individually, and then lay it out in front of you and do the comparison. And that was very intentional. We asked them if we would have a comparison tool, and they said, no, that's not what this project is about. I think the third thing to mention here too, Jeff, is that this project is driven by the General Assembly. This isn't driven by the system office. May the system office assume ownership of this and find uses for it? Sure, absolutely. But Deloitte's customer, Deloitte's client in this is the General Assembly. So they are developing and driving all of this project in interaction with the assembly and to the specs of and to the direction of the General Assembly. So that's really a place where we need to be looking to be asking, how are they going to use this? What's their purpose?
Jody, can I add
Debbie,
a bit
please,
to that? I
yes.
think I really like Jeff's question. I will say at the provost meeting system-wide, we have raised significant concern both about the meta department issue and the lack of context. The data is just, one-time snapshot. And what we're arguing for is every institution is different, every program is different, and we'd like to provide a context to help people interpret the data. We have not been given any clarity about what options we have. I will tell you, our team is pulling together a context statement now to provide some feedback to this first rendition of the data that raises concerns about some of the issues that's already been discussed today. But I think the broader concern that I have is that there's no context. They're going to be interpreting, these are General Assembly folks interpreting these messages of this data without a lot of information. And I'm less concerned about the comparison, although I think that will happen. I'm more concerned about just the data without any understanding. So we're working behind the scenes to try to encourage the system to provide important context. And again, they're not the client. So it's really the General Assembly. And it doesn't take one much to come to a conclusion that this is going to inform how they fund higher education, right? So it's concerning.
Thanks, Jeff. Diane?
Thank you very much, and thanks for an excellent presentation by the team. I have a suggestion because you mentioned that we can make those. And my suggestion is that we don't consider just single majors. We consider double majors, triple majors. That is going to make a major difference on the ROI. And I realize that how we record things is one major, and that's how things are counted. But I think this is a major flaw if we're trying to really measure ROI for the student and costs. And so I would sincerely make that suggestion that that's included. I understand that taking it down even the next level to minors, which also affects their job prospects, is a whole nother set of work that probably we couldn't make that suggestion right now, but definitely past the one major. Thank you.
Diane, we've absolutely shared that with them. So they have heard that on multiple times from multiple institutions. And we can continue to make that point to them. Thanks. Roy.
First of all, Vidya is correct. Yes, it is the usual suspects again. But my question and kind of alert is I feel like we're in the midst of a three-way tug of war regarding high stakes assessment. One, we have the ROI study, with the primary audience being the state legislature. Two, we have UNCG's Academic Program Review 2.0, which presumably is both informative to us as an institution and to our leadership, as well as potentially informing RPK in terms of the university's priorities and performance. And then three, we have the RPK group's study of UNCG. So my question concerns alignment here, because I'm very concerned that we have three different types of high stakes reviews, each of which may be using different metrics and prioritizing different things. And I don't know how these are supposed to inform or reinforce each other, because I'm worried that we might get into the situation where, in doing everything we can to perform certain ways on, let's say, RPK's study, that we might be sacrificing some of our performance ability in one of the other areas. So could someone speak to this? May be more of a provost type of question, but if anybody can speak to that and maybe say something about how we can optimally align these, that would be really helpful.
So Roy, I just want to make sure I understand. So are you talking about our engagement with RPK to develop some data and dashboards? That is intended for our own internal use, for us to make some decisions and recommendations. That's internal.
Right.
That's not going to be public sharing. That's internal only. So that to me, I see as distinguished from this General Assembly ROI study. Now, the ROI study led by Deloitte, they have a subcontract with RPK who went into the databases that we have, the data marts, to help pull in some data. But so that's a subset of what you're seeing in terms of those dashboards. Those aren't the same kind of dashboards we want to develop that we can replicate internally year after year so we can continuously provide people with information and data. So I see them as separate. Are those the two things you're talking about? Because you mentioned three.
Well, yeah, the three things, that the internal academic program review, the faculty driven things that we're now kind of, strategizing, RPK, and then the ROI study, because I understand the different audiences and everything, but I mean, we need to kind of focus on how we are charting our course for the future. Obviously, we're going to have to adapt to position ourselves well in terms of maybe future ROI studies and the General Assembly's priorities. But then we also have our own priorities. And then we have presumably a mix with the RPK consulting of, the priorities that they derive from us, and also that they might be suggesting could inform us, because they do have some points of reference, obviously beyond UNCG.
Yeah, so Roy, I'm not quite sure what your question is. Here's my thoughts though. Our process for program review and the development of dashboards that can really inform the campus community is central. That's number one priority for me. And if we do the right things and have the right valid data to inform our decisions, that I think will address some of the larger issues that the system office or the General Assembly might be concerned about or not. I can't control what we can't control. So we can't control what they're doing. All we can control is our data, how that data is going to inform our decisions, and then providing the argument and the context for how we're good stewards of state dollars. So I understand your frustration that it seems to be like multiple things happening at one time, including this funding formula, which is informing our behavior necessarily, right, because of the budget. So I do understand. My focus is really what we can control, and that's our internal process with program review, not yet determined, and whatever decisions we make about our portfolio.
Thanks, because data quality was a critical issue that basically was a major cause of academic program review 1.0, which I still bear lasting scars from. But that really impeded the work at every level there, because there were a lot of data gaps and data inconsistencies. So, if we can address those, that's a great.
Yeah, and Roy, this week we'll be having sessions with RPK where we can bring these issues up. I wasn't here when you had this first program review. We are not that's like the past. I don't care about that. That didn't work. There were problems. I understand there were real challenges. We have to come up with a process, data, and a verification process of that data that we all have confidence in order to make sound decisions. So I'm in agreement with you. So those sessions will be this week too. So it'll be important for them to hear.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, if you have additional questions, please email them to me. I'll bring them to the group. I'll get them to the provost. I'll get them to the UNC system and the consultants as appropriate. And I will share information as soon as we have it about more access to these dashboards and your ability to get in and comment publicly yourself. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.